Major funding for this program was provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
I carried the first people to these islands. We sailed through oceans and heavens, followed rising and setting stars, with and against winds and currents, praying for a good voyage.
To spirits we pray.
I studied in Hawaii and California only to discover that the biggest truths are found in my own backyard. I'm from a part of the Pacific misnamed Micronesia, which means tiny islands. And yet, us little people have a tradition of traveling that allowed us to traverse the world's biggest body of water, long before others even left sight of their own shores. Our ancestors accomplished great voyages through technologies of canoe design, such as the outrigger that provided balance and stability, or hulls that applied the aerodynamic principles of lift, now used in airplane wings. The ancient ones amassed an incredible knowledge of stars and clouds, of waves and ocean currents, of the movement of sea creatures, and they prayed to spirits who guided their voyages. When I returned home, I began to study our seafaring traditions because the canoe is the foundation of our heritage. For me, a Micronesian academic, the canoe is more than a foundation. It is a metaphor for a history of island and islander travel. In my studies, I focused on two particular islands, Polowat in the Central Carolines and Guam in the Marianas, where I live. The Polowatese today are famous because they continue to carve and sail canoes using the old methods, while the Chamorros were famous in the past for having the fastest and the most beautiful canoes in the world. Like other Micronesian islanders, the Polowatese and the Chamorros had maintained contact long before the arrival and the settlement of foreigners. At the outset of colonial rule, these ties were severed. Today, a new generation of Polowatese and Chamorros reconnect the old links in an effort to preserve ancient traditions. In modern times, ancient traditions continue to explore new horizons.
When I first became interested in canoe culture, I was attending college in Colorado at a small state college in Gunnison. And my father would send me glimpses magazines from Guam. One of the glimpses that he sent me was on the canoes of Polowat. So after I read that, I told myself I'm basically going to go back home and find out about this canoe culture on Guam and see if there were any canoe builders or master canoe builders left here. When I returned, I was introduced to Segundo Blas, one of the last active master canoe builders at that time. After having met Segundo, I was trying to figure out a way that we could work together and build a canoe the types of canoes that he built. So then I would ask him questions. How long do you think it would take to build this size canoe? I looked around for a tree that I thought would be suitable for the canoe we talked about, and I told him the dimensions, and he said, well, it'll probably take us about 3 months to build this canoe. When we first started working, I knew that there was some value in recording this, so I bought my first camera and immediately started taking pictures of everything. I would tell myself every hour I'm going to take one picture, and over a period of time you could actually see through a series of photographs what was being done. And the role of documenting was important because it's difficult to tell children about something they can't see, and if they can see something, they might become interested. So it's a valuable tool. The obvious reasons why we are lacking so much of our our culture, our seafaring culture here, is because of the Spanish, the conflict between the Spanish and the Chamorros at the time. The canoe and the means of getting around and communicating with other islands and getting large groups of people together was a threat to the Spanish, so they made a concerted effort to destroy that part of the culture.
I am the way of the people. I am the islands. When I disappear, they disappear. But when you see me, you see them.
The disappearance of the canoe in Guam has been identified with the death of native culture due to foreign domination. Here, history is misconceived as what outsiders have done to passive natives whose cultures are weak and fragile. On Polowat, the presence of the canoe is equated with the survival of native culture. But here it is the story of culture that is problematic. Here, the presence of canoes and canoe houses gets misconstrued by outsiders as exotic relics of an isolated, primitive people, as if the Polowatis were stuck in some prehistoric time. Or worse yet, as if they were forgotten by time. The problem with these misconceptions is that the Chamorros get to have history but no culture, while the Polowatis get to have culture but no history.
I grew up with my brother, Suste, in a culture where canoe was just, almost everything there is just about the sea itself. So I grew up in a totally different environment, different mentality, different understanding and concepts of the ocean and the world. But most of the time I spend with my younger brother, we'll be out in the sea, they will be looking for us. We make model canoes ever since we were small.
I know that the life of Polowat people depends on those traditional way, like in navigating and fishing. When I finished high school, I came back here to Polowat and helped our family. I started making canoe. Dino tried to get to college, to Hawaii. I told Dino, if he come back from school, I let him know what I learned, and then he'll help me know what he learned from American way of life.
To come from a place where people are traveling, my going to school is, I didn't think of it as leaving the culture, or I think it's part of my journey in life to explore different world, inwardly and the physical world. Every time I learn new things, it brings me back closer to my own culture, almost a sacred culture.
Knowledge about navigation is secret. You only learn from your father. There is a term for this. It is Roanailide. Means we learn while we sleep with our fathers. While we were still young, like maybe 6 or 7, we learned some lullabies, but we don't know what the words mean. When we grew up, those songs have a meaning for Sadie. We already knew it, and we learned it while sleeping with our father.
You don't inherit anything from your father. The name of your clan, the status, whether you're a chief or what, you get it from your mother. Well, you see, I learned from my father. How do you have a father? You only have a father through your mother.
They say that in Polowat, the sea is the man's domain, while the land belongs to the women. This is why men build and sail canoes, while women work the land. But the canoe bridges the gaps between the land and the sea, between men and women. Women, for example, gain new status and prestige from their men's voyages, just as men receive their titles and their resources from their women's lineage.
All the activities involved in making a canoe are sacred. And the name itself, Wa, means vessel. It is the carrier of life, of food, of fish, of people from place to place.
I am the Galai, the Sekmen, the Wa. I fought their big, clumsy ships, and I was banned, outlawed, almost forgotten.
This new canoe is different from any other canoe built in Polowat. It is being carved by many different people, not just one master canoe builder. Each of us will get to shape the canoe the way we want, but we are also being guided by Manupi, my adoptive father. Even if Manupi can no longer carve, he tries to teach us the skills needed to build this canoe. He inspires us.
Polowat is part of Chuk in the Federated States of Micronesia. European explorers visited these islands since the 16th century, but did not establish colonial rule until the beginning of this century. Since then, 4 foreign nations, Spain, Germany, Japan, and the United States, have exerted their rule over the Polowatese. Still, Polowat appears untouched, pristine. In the late 20th century, when the rest of the world is described as post-industrial or even post-modern, Polowat lacks the modern conveniences of electricity, running water, and automobiles. In recent years, Polowat has seen an increase in motorboats and generators. These, however, remain at the mercy of fuel brought by irregular ships from Moan, Chuk's capital. In contrast, Guam to the north was the first Pacific island to bear the yoke of European colonization. Hence, Guam and Polowat are at opposite ends of Micronesia's experience of colonization. In the 16th and 17th centuries, Spain claimed Guam and sent Catholic missionaries to convert the Chamorros. At the end of the 19th century, the United States took possession of Guam from Spain. And in the last 30 years, Guam would experience one of the highest growth rates in the world. And Guam, USA would become a favorite destination for Asian and American tourists, investors, and settlers alike.
What I learned from Segundo is what was left of our canoe culture here on Guam, and that's primarily style of the canoe. I mean, all the canoes are based on the same principles: outrigger, asymmetrical hull, lateen sail. During the time that we were carving, the curiosity of, what does the wood smell like, how does it carve, and increasing my skills with the adze were all answered. But I still wanted to know things like, well, I know the canoes a long time ago were much taller, were much longer. This was a one-piece dugout. So I knew there was more, but I knew that in this apprenticeship that I was doing with Segundo, I had to hold back on that and follow what he was doing. Okay, this man is the master canoe builder. It's going to be his canoe. I'm just a participant in this process. I had my own ideas. I made a point to say to myself, we can use this as a vehicle to experimenting, putting a sail on the canoe, which I eventually did, without assistance from Segundo, explore these other areas that were still unanswered. After the completion of that canoe, we sailed. Gary Guerrero, many friends were able to take the canoe out into the East Agana area and sail it extensively and say, well, this about the canoe doesn't work so well, this does, and actually answer these questions through experience, through hands-on experience. The canoe was donated to the Guam Museum. It's good that it's there. It's a piece of our history, and school children also have the opportunity to see it during Chamorro Week.
See me here, remember, memorialize, or forgotten. How do you see me here?
It is curious that this canoe, built only a decade ago, would already be sitting still in a museum, like a relic of days gone by. Did the canoe culture in Guam die just as quickly as the heroic effort to revive it? I don't think so. Rather, I like to think that the spirit that built it now inhabits the museum, and in the museum awaits some unsuspecting visitor, some new vessel to possess. Who will be so possessed? Who is next to seize the adze and carve another canoe, and then another, and again another, until there are lots of canoes plying Guam's waters once again.
When I go back there now and I look at that canoe, I just think it's something that was a long time ago, and there's other things that I want to go move on to. Certain aspects and principles just didn't exist here any longer, and that was planking to make the canoe higher. Also the sailing, the navigation, the names of stars. So I wanted to go to Polowat to learn these unanswered questions. My experiences of working on canoes on Polowat, and then later thinking about my personal experience, and I started to discover that there is knowledge there waiting to be discovered. You just have to take different paths to discover it.
In Polowat, there's a term, Hegi, which is associated with learning about navigation. Hegi means unfolding the woven mat. There are mats for learning about the stars, mats for learning about building canoes. There are mats for building canoe houses. Hegi also means opening up your heart. It means that a navigator will reveal all he knows to his student.
To be a good navigator, we find someone who is expert in navigation. For me and Tino, our adopted father is a real and great navigator.
He started teaching me how many stars there are, the names of the stars, and different techniques in navigation. And I would talk to my uncle Rap. We would ask him to write it down. He's reluctant. He doesn't want me to write it down. If you write a knowledge, it's not safe. Somebody can steal it from you. It can be wet when there's typhoon. The safest locker is your brain.
When I studied about navigation, is different from my student today. So we have some American custom, Turkish custom. My teacher before didn't like me to write and record what they teach me. That way we can memorize what we learn. But now they record and write what I taught them.
Unfortunately, I think in this modern day, you're going out there to go to school and you're missing the days of your instruction from your elderlies, your fathers, your uncles. So the locker is empty. So you need to put them somewhere that would be on paper.
The old navigators, they still remember from a long time ago without writing down in the book. But me, I just learned right after when I graduated from Duke High School. And when someone talked to me about birds and fish, I get mad if I forget. I come back home and open my notebook. My father, he checked my book. If he saw that I miss some birds and fish, he said, I already told you this, and why you forget?
Learning of navigation is a long process, including discipline, worshiping, magic, and everything else. And one should know that a navigator is the complete person in the culture of Polowat, because he has to learn everything: safety, leadership. They learn fighting also, like Kung Fu. So after he finished, he'll be almost like a ninja, Superman. That when you have a problem, he said, I'm sick, okay, I do this for you. So those who completed the art of navigation, they said they're initiated. In my own translation, they're not initiated, they're ordained, because they're priests. They perform purification of souls. While learning, it's like they're in a monastery, where they're isolating themselves. There are certain times where they're even restrained from sex. They discipline themselves. They come out a complete man.
Some chant from Manidi, I kept in tape recorder because in order to make the spirit have a good feeling that we want to see the spirit, and we make a good tune so he can
They turn back and say, okay, I let you the way because you do it right.
In Polowat, the ceremony called Po marks the end of a student's training and the beginning of his new title as navigator. In part, Po involves calling upon the spirits to stay with you. But because the Polowatis have recently converted to Christianity, there has not been a Po ceremony in over 30 years. This has presented a dilemma. If you call on the spirits, you go against the new religion. But if you do not respect the spirits of the canoe, you might get lost in your voyage.
The old navigators who went through Po, and all the spirits are watching all over, just watching the sailors, what they do. And for us, maybe because they don't make us get into the Po party ceremony, and we go to church before we sail. Because they told us that someone who make Po have all the spirits of things. Like in church, they said the old things are go against their religion. This is how we do it now. Before, the spirits are especially for those who have Po. If I believe that the Po will do a good thing for me, the Po will still be alive.
A Po is a complete person. It comes from a process of preparing food, breadfruit, taro. After you cook it, you pound it until just like a mashed potato. The best way is the pounded one because the young and the old can eat it without problem. So a person who completed navigation, he's been refined through the process of life. You cannot even find a grain in him anymore. He's refined. He's like a water, and water is powerful.
But if men are the Po, the embodiment of refinement and perfection, what does it mean that the women are the Po pounders?
The projects that are ongoing now are to build a sailing canoe, and that would be done at the canoe house that we're building, and using our skills from Polowat and Segundo. The canoe itself, the style, represents what our canoes here on Guam would have looked like many, many years ago. We hope to take the canoe and sail up to the Northern Marianas, a voyage that hasn't taken place in over 300 years. It's been difficult. We've had to translate a money economy as a means of support, whereas in Polowat, of course, the whole community would come together. It's very difficult dovetailing the old cultural ways to the realities of what we have here on Guam, which are, it's a money-based economy. So essentially, we've had times where we've had the resources to work, and we've done that diligently, and we've worked really hard. We've gotten to the point where it's almost complete. We got half of it thatched. We ran out of resources. In many respects, we ran out of energy. So at this point, we're really at a standstill. And I think that's good in a way, because we've had to reflect on where did we go wrong in navigating through the society that we have to work within. What we really have to turn to is ourselves and say, okay, the way that we have survived outsiders coming to Guam has essentially been to adapt to different changes. But it's also not so much about the past, how it was, but how it is. And part of how it is, you make changes and you adapt, and some of the modern things that you see in these old things are just part of it. It's just how they evolve.
Things should change as culture is changing. That doesn't change the element, it's just the method of obtaining it and saving it. In these modern days, I think that the culture is so important and so valuable and should be saved. And one way to save it is to share it with others, with the world.
Tino asked me if anybody can help preserve the culture, because we lost many cultures in Chuk. They didn't know how to build big canoe for voyage. If you can do this, maybe you can help Chuk. I traveled to many different places presenting how to build a canoe or navigations.
So both of them together, that's how you say, oh, it's day number 7.
A person's learning can only be meaningful if you know what you are, what your culture is. Otherwise, you just hang from a tree, you don't have any roots.
Now, we try to go back to our own traditional way of living, because money is the key for American way. But our way doesn't need any money. We can go by canoe and the wind.
My kids, sometimes I talk to them about navigation. They go during the summers and join my brother's kids on the island. That's where I want to live the rest of my life. Whether I can make it back there, I don't know, but I always want to go back home.
I was sculpted by your hands, fashioned by your mind,
The outrigger.
stabilized and balanced by the outrigger you lashed. I have traveled for thousands of years, thousands of miles for you. Now, I sculpt you, fashion you, stabilize and balance you, and we shall travel for 1,000 more years, 1,000 more miles.
Major funding for this program was provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.